One night, a helicopter was flying somewhere above New York. There were 5 people on board. The pilot, sprinter Usain Bolt, world's richest man Bill Gates, renowned scientist Albert Einstein, and a hippie. Suddenly, an oxygen generator exploded loudly in the luggage compartment, and the passenger cabin began to fill with smoke. The cockpit door opened, and the pilot burst into the compartment. "Gentlemen," he began, "I have good news and bad news. The bad news is that we're about to crash in New York, you know. The good news is that there are 4 parachutes, and I have one of them." With that, the pilot threw open the door and jumped from the plane. Usain Bolt was on his feet in a flash. "Gentlemen," he said, "I am the world's greatest athlete. The world needs great athletes. I think the world's greatest athlete should have a parachute." With these words, he grabbed one of the remaining parachutes and hurtled through the door and into the night. Bill Gates rose and said, "Gentlemen, I am the world's smartest man. The world needs smart men. I think the world's smartest man should have a parachute too." He grabbed one and out he jumped. Albert Einstein and the hippie looked at one another. Finally, Einstein spoke. "My son," he said, "ich have lived a satisfying life und have known the bliss of winning a Nobel Prize and developing the theory of relativity and equating mass to energy. You take a parachute and ich will go down with the helicopter." The hippie smiled slowly and said, "Hey, don't worry, buddy. The smartest man in the world just jumped out wearing my backpack." Bill Gates, the smart man, jumped. The smart man, Bill Gates, jumped. What's the verb in the first sentence? It's jumped. What about the subject? That's Bill Gates. So what is man? Man is the appositive, and appositives can also take modifiers such as adjectives. Now this appositive man refers to Bill Gates, the subject. Now if we look at the second sentence, what is the verb? Now you've guessed it, it's the same one, jumped. What is the subject? That's man. Now what is Bill Gates then? Bill Gates is then the appositive. And the appositive here refers to the subject man. Now if we take away the appositive and its modifiers, we are left with Bill Gates jumped. Does that make sense? It does make sense. Do we know who jumped? We do. Bill Gates jumped. So this kind of appositive is called a non-restrictive appositive. Now let's have a look at the next sentence. If we omit that appositive, we've got the smart man jumped. Does that make sense? It sure does. Do we know who jumped? We know that the smart man jumped. Do we know which smart man, assuming that there are lots of smart men in the world? We don't know which smart man jumped. So in this case, the appositive Bill Gates is necessary, and therefore it is called a restrictive appositive. Now how do you tell the difference between them? Basically, a non-restrictive appositive will be separated from the rest of the sentence by commas. Make sure that the commas go around not only the appositive but the adjectives as well. Let's have a look at the definition of an appositive. An appositive is a noun or pronoun that renames or identifies the preceding noun or pronoun. Now tell me, what's the definition of an appositive? Wonderful! What's the definition of an appositive? Very good. What's the definition of an appositive? Awesome. What's the definition of an appositive? Very good. Tell me what the definition of an appositive. Excellent. Now, let's have a look at how to mark an appositive in. We've already seen an example of that at the start of this lesson. In this sentence, Dr. Seuss coined the word nerd in his 1950 book, If I Ran the Zoo. So the verb is coined, the subject is Dr. Seuss, the direct object is word, and nerd is an appositive. In his 1950 book is a prepositional phrase with a preposition and an object of preposition, and If I Ran the Zoo is the title of a book and it's the appositive. Now, this prepositional phrase refers to the appositive, well, it modifies that appositive. That appositive refers to the direct object word, and the second appositive, If I Ran the Zoo, refers to the word book. So appositives can refer to nouns that are direct objects, objects prepositions, subjects, basically any kind of noun in a sentence. Let's have a look at how to diagram an appositive. So you need the baseline, and you got the subject and the verb and the direct object there, and you can see that appositives can refer to subjects or objects of prepositions or direct objects. Even indirect objects can have an appositive. Let's have a look at how to diagram an appositive. So basically what you'll do is you'll put the appositive in parentheses after the word that it refers to. So nerd refers to the direct object word, which means it needs to be placed in parentheses after that direct object. The same thing goes for the appositive If I Ran the Zoo. That goes in parentheses after the word book. Let's have another look at restrictive and non-restrictive appositives. The book The Alchemist changes its readers' lives. The book changes its readers' lives. So remember, here's the verb, subject, and direct object, and alchemist, or the alchemist, is the appositive. And that appositive refers to the word book, the subject in this case. And the second sentence, the verb is changes, the subject is the alchemist, direct object is lives, and book is the appositive here. And the appositive refers to the subject, the alchemist. Now, which one is non-restrictive and which one is restrictive? Well, let's see. The first one, the book changes its readers' lives. Does that make sense? It does make sense. Do we know which book? We don't know which book. Therefore, this first sentence is a restrictive appositive because that appositive is necessary for us to know which book changed the readers' lives. For the second one, do we need the book to know what changed readers' lives? No, because it already tells us in the subject. The alchemist changes its readers' lives, which means that this is a non-restrictive appositive. And it also means that this sentence requires commas around the appositive and its modifiers to separate it from the rest of the sentence. Let's look at the first five. American presidents John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Monroe died on July the 4th. What is the verb here? Died, what's the subject? President is the subject. On July the 4th is a prepositional phrase. John Adams is an appositive. Thomas Jefferson is an appositive, and James Monroe is an appositive. So you have a compound appositive, and American is an adjective. This prepositional phrase modifies died. And each of these appositives refers to presidents. What kind of appositives are they? Restrictive or non-restrictive? They are restrictive appositives. Do they need commas? No. Now, how do you diagram the first sentence? Here is the diagram. Notice that we have a compound appositive in parentheses, diagrammed like so. So if you got that, good work. It's a bit of a tricky one. So here's the second one. Ray Bradbury, author of Fahrenheit 451, was descended from one of the Salem witches. So mark in this sentence. Here is the marking. So the author, or the word author, is an appositive for Ray Bradbury. And is it restrictive or non-restrictive? It is non-restrictive, which means it requires commas around it. Here's the second. How do you diagram this sentence? Here is the diagram. Now, when you're diagramming this one, notice that of Fahrenheit 451 appears underneath author. If this was underneath Ray Bradbury, then that would be wrong, because it would read Ray Bradbury of Fahrenheit 451, author, was descended. That would be wrong. So you need to make sure that any modifiers for the appositive go underneath the appositive. Let's look at the third one. Charles Dickens' most famous story, A Christmas Carol, was written in 6 weeks. How do you mark the sentence? Here is the marking. Now, is it restrictive or non-restrictive? It's non-restrictive. Why is it non-restrictive? Well, because you've got his most famous story. So people know what his most famous story is, A Christmas Carol. Therefore, based on that, A Christmas Carol is extra information. And it also means that this sentence requires commas around the appositive and its modifiers to separate it from the rest of the sentence. How do you diagram this sentence? Here is the diagram. The fourth one. 20,000 people attended the funeral of writer, politician, and scientist Benjamin Franklin. This is another tricky one. It's similar to the first one. You have to use what you know about that one to do something like this. There is a little bit of a difference though. So how do you mark this sentence? Here is the marking. So is this restrictive or non-restrictive? This is restrictive because we do not know which writer, politician, or scientist they are talking of. Only when we place the appositive, Benjamin Franklin, do we know that they're actually talking about Benjamin Franklin. So this is a restrictive appositive. It is necessary for us to know this to be able to understand the sentence. How do you diagram this sentence? Here is the diagram. Let's look at the fifth one. Poet William Blake had a height of 152 centimeters. So, is this restrictive or non-restrictive? They are restrictive appositives. How do we know that? Well, we don't know which poet it is, so William Blake is necessary for us to understand which poet it is. How do you diagram this sentence? Here is the diagram. So, let's have a look at some handy tips. Here's what you need to know. Make sure that when you're marking one of these, ascertain if it is a non-restrictive or restrictive appositive. Non-restrictive ones will have commas around them to separate them from the sentence and to indicate that they are necessary and extra information, whereas a restrictive appositive will not have any commas, which will indicate that they are necessary for us to understand the sentence. Also, when you diagram a sentence that contains an appositive, you must make sure that any modifiers of the appositive go underneath that appositive. So that includes any adjectives or prepositional phrases or any other phrases that modify that appositive. They must go underneath that appositive in the diagram. So if you have lots of modifiers for that, you'll need to make sure that you have lots of room to fit them all underneath that appositive. So that's the lesson on appositives. I hope you've learnt a lot, and we will see you in the next video.